Hi. I'll be discussing academic language and math as a part of this discussion. To start off with, there's a lot of misconceptions about academic language and math. Most people think math is just based on arithmetic, numbers, and solving for problems, but in reality, the times that we're shifting in is math has a lot more academic language involved in it nowadays than it did in the past. Just for example, understanding how parts of a equation make sense, we need to understand the language to explain those equations. So if we're going to discuss equations, students must understand words in academic language such as specific to the math content, such as variable, terms, solve for. These particular terms relate to the math subject. And then on top of that, there's academic language greater than that refers to all school language. So things that have them explain, discuss, compare, contrast, things like those are going to be academic language that covers as a whole school. So nowadays, math questions aren't based off just having kids learn a method and study it for a test and then forget it anymore. It's having students actually discover some of these math. This is actually having children discover these math terms by discovery, and then and then connecting academic language to the discoveries they made. So if students are solving for variables, they'll discover that what they do to one side, they need to do to the other side. And what we call that term is we call it isolating variables. So once students learn the process, they learn the academic language that follows that. And it helps stick in their head better, and it allows them to have better conversations, better understanding, and more meaning to the math that they just did, opposed to just blindly accepting it and learning it for a test. Math language has just a lot of functions, so there's more reasons now to ever deal with academic language and math. So talking about it, discussing it, and then sharing your thoughts with partners is used more in activities I've seen today than I have seen when I was in school. So when I was in math classes, a lot of the the content was based off the teacher would go up to the whiteboard, write down some notes, you would write down the notes, and then you would just study those notes for a test. Nowadays, students are discussing math, they're talking about math, they're just talking about their work, the process that they did, the steps that they did. So in order to do that, students must have a word bank of academic language in their head. So there's now reason for students to learn the terms, the language, and the steps that they're doing, so they can put reason behind what they're doing, as opposed to, I saw the teacher do this, so I'm doing it. So they need to understand that balancing, isolating equations, and all those things have purpose, and they have reasoning, and they have a deeper meaning for why we're doing that, all connected in the math realm for that. Students how are now coming up with questions that have them deal with short answers. So the questions nowadays students are being asked don't just say, use the substitution method and come up with an answer and show your solution and box your solution. It's now having students come up with those same answers, but now it's having them explain how they got their answer. So not only are they going to have to show their reasoning and show their work, but they're going to have to show some academic language and show that they're understanding what it is that they are writing about. So there's a lot of important terms to keep in mind from academic language term and math. So understanding the difference between a variable and an exponent, those are things that confuse students often. So they're often connected, where a variable will be connected to an exponent. And if we're discussing that, it's important for students to differentiate the two. So we need to understand that a variable could be a letter, and an exponent goes on top of that, could go on top of that variable, or it can go on top of numbers. So understanding the deeper understanding and where these terms lie with each other also helps them deal with more academic language specific to the math content. Word problems are now putting more emphasis on addressing academic language. So word problems have always been a doozy when it comes to math classes. It's always the one part that students dread, because it's the one part that they don't understand, or they just don't want to break down, or it just comes to a lot having to read a lot of information and then process that information that you did with some math. So there's a lot of parts when it comes to word problems, and if you're able to break down the academic language that is poised in those questions, it'll be a lot easier. So nowadays the work and students are doing in the classes, have them break down these word problems bit by bit, have them understand what the quantities understand, what the question is asking, and then it allows them to solve. So students aren't just blindly going into word problems, where as soon as they see academic language that they don't understand, they give up. Students are now understanding to break down this word problem, break it down into more manageable sizes. So it's kind of like slicing up a steak into more manageable bite-sized chews. So academic language is important in math classes. As I started off, a lot of misconceptions come in the class thinking that academic language is exclusive to those classes such as history, reading and science that have to do with more text-based reading. But in math, there's still a lot of opportunities to discuss academic language, incorporate it, and make sure that students understand those.